She is famous, award-winning, and recognized worldwide. But in Korea, few names divide the public as much as hers. To some, Park Shin-hye is an icon. To others, an overrated actress who should never have made it so far. Today, you will understand why Park Shin-hye became the most criticized actress in the country, and why this says much more about the public than about her. Shin-hye didn't become famous gradually. She simply exploded. At a very young age, she was already the lead in major productions, working alongside A-list actors and carrying entire dramas on her back. To those watching from the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, a super talented child. But within the logic of the Korean industry, and especially the mentality of the more critical public, this early success marked the beginning of a problem that would follow her throughout her career. In South Korea, there is an unwritten rule. An actor or actress must earn the top. They must suffer rejections, spend years in supporting roles, accept small characters, be ignored by the media, and nearly disappear before finally being recognized. Park Shin-hye completely broke this narrative. She skipped steps that take other actresses an entire decade to achieve. And when someone rises too fast, the public reacts not only with admiration, but also with suspicion. From very early on, even the slightest flaw was amplified. A scene that was less emotionally explosive became a sign of weak acting. A more restrained or introspective character was called expressionless. If a drama didn't please everyone, the responsibility fell almost automatically on her. What for other actresses would be treated as a phase, a learning curve, or a simple script choice, for Park Shin-hye became definitive proof that she didn't deserve to be where she was. Early success created a cruel paradox. The more famous she became, the less room she had to fail. While other actresses could mature in front of the public, change gradually, and even fail without major consequences, Park Shin-hye was forced to seem complete from the start. And when someone is placed on that pedestal too early, every misstep becomes a collective attempt to bring them down. Over the years, this narrative crystallized. It didn't matter the new project, the new role, or the visible effort in every work. For part of the public, Park Shin-hye already had a preset sentence. She was only there because she started too early, because she was lucky, because the system pushed her to the top. Not because she evolved, not because she worked hard, not because she stayed relevant through her own merit. And perhaps this is Park Shin-hye's greatest sin in the eyes of Korea, arriving too early where many believe she shouldn't be yet. In an industry that romanticizes long, painful trajectories full of obstacles, early success isn't seen as talent. It's seen as a mistake that needs to be corrected. If there is one phrase that has haunted Park Shin-hye since the beginning of her adult career, it is this: she always acts the same. This label became almost automatic. Even before a drama premieres, part of the audience goes in expecting to confirm this idea. And when someone watches looking for a flaw, they will almost always find something to criticize. The problem is that, in Park Shin-hye's case, this criticism stopped being technical and became a prior conviction. Many viewers began analyzing her every facial expression with a magnifying glass, waiting for micro variations to prove she had evolved. If the acting was more restrained, they said she had no emotion. If it was more intense, they claimed she was overacting. There was no acceptable middle ground. Much of this perception comes from the fact that Park Shin-hye played emotionally similar characters for years, good, resilient women who suffer in silence and carry the weight of the narrative. This type of role requires more internal, less explosive acting. But for an audience used to dramatic and exaggerated performances, this subtlety was mistaken for limitation. Over time, the label grew stronger. Even when she chose different, more mature, or darker characters, the reaction was already prepackaged. People weren't analyzing the role, they were analyzing the image they had of her. And when an actress is labeled this way, any attempt at change feels fake or insufficient. Another cruel factor is the constant comparison. Park Shin-hye began to be placed side by side with actresses known for more explosive or experimental performances. Thus, the public insisted on treating her acting as inferior. The irony is that this label became a dead-end trap. If Park Shin-hye maintains her style, they say she isn't evolving. If she tries something different, they claim she is forcing it. For many, it doesn't matter what she does. The decision was made before the first scene even aired. The public's gaze when it comes to Shin-hye seems biased. She hasn't been judged by what she delivers for a long time, but by how they expect her to fail. And when an actress carries a label for too long, it stops being a critique and becomes a sentence. Another decisive factor for Park Shin-hye becoming one of Korea's most criticized actresses is something that at first glance seems positive. She starred in dramas that were too big, extremely popular productions with massive ratings, intense fandoms, and absurd expectations. And in the Korean industry, the greater the success, the greater the unwarranted hate that comes with it. Dramas like You're Beautiful, The Heirs, and Pinocchio weren't just hits. They became cultural phenomena. Millions of people watched, commented, created theories, defended characters, and inevitably looked for someone to blame when something didn't please them. In productions of this size, the lead becomes the primary target. In Park Shin-hye's case, that target became permanent. When a small drama fails, it is simply forgotten. When a giant drama disappoints part of the audience, it becomes a battlefield. Every scene is dissected, every choice is questioned, every facial expression is judged. And since Park Shin-hye was repeatedly at the center of these productions, a distorted impression was created that she was the recurring problem, when in fact, she was simply in the most visible spot. There is also the image fatigue effect. The Korean public consumes content intensely and rapidly. Seeing the same actress in big projects, one after another, creates saturation. Not because she is doing something wrong, but because the excess generates rejection. Instead of recognizing consistency, part of the public began to see forced repetition. Furthermore, extremely popular dramas attract viewers who don't always analyze acting deeply. Many watch for the hype, the romance, or the male actors. When something doesn't deliver the expected fantasy, frustration turns into a direct attack, and the lead actress usually pays the highest price. Over time, Park Shin-hye became an easy symbol for accumulated criticism. It didn't matter if the script was weak, the direction failed, or the story lost its way. Excessive success created an unfair narrative. If this drama wasn't perfect, it's her fault. Thus, what should have been the greatest asset of Park Shin-hye's career, always being in the most talked about projects, ended up becoming one of the main reasons she was constantly attacked. Because in Korea, being too popular is also a crime. But perhaps the main issue is that no actress in Korea is analyzed in isolation. Yet few have been compared as constantly and cruelly as Park Shin-hye. Over the years, she has been placed side by side with practically every major actress of her generation, and almost always in comparisons that were inherently unbalanced. It wasn't about analyzing different styles, but about proving that someone had to lose for another to be exalted. Park Shin-hye began to be used as a yardstick. Whenever a new actress emerged with a more intense, artistic, or critically acclaimed performance, the discourse was ready. She is better than Park Shin-hye. This was repeated countless times, creating the feeling that Park Shin-hye's career existed only to serve as a contrast, rather than its own trajectory. The problem with these comparisons is that they ignore completely different contexts. Actresses like Jun Ji-hyun, Kim Tae-ri, or even Park Min-young followed different paths, chose different genres, and worked with narrative styles that favor more explosive or visibly award-winning performances. Park Shin-hye, on the other hand, built her career on popular melodramas, mainstream romances, and emotionally more contained stories. Comparing these trajectories as if they were equivalent is, at the very least, unfair. Moreover, the criticism rarely stopped at acting. Often, the attacks slipped into appearance, charisma, screen presence, and even personality off-camera. This made Park Shin-hye an easy target because criticizing her didn't generate much social backlash. On the contrary, it seemed acceptable. It even seemed expected. Over time, this type of comparison stopped being analysis and became a habit. The public no longer watched her work to understand the character, but to confirm an old opinion. And when someone is watched through that filter, every detail becomes proof of inferiority. In the end, Park Shin-hye wasn't just criticized by those who disliked her. She was used as a tool to inflate other actresses. And when an entire career starts being treated as a negative reference, effort, consistency, and years of work matter little. Constant comparison doesn't seek justice. It only seeks someone to tear down. However, having said all that, when Park Shin-hye announced her marriage, and shortly after motherhood, many believed this would further humanize her image. But in South Korea, especially for actresses, this step usually has the opposite effect. What should be seen as a natural evolution of life became, once again, a new reason for distancing, judgment, and silence. There is an undeclared but extremely real prejudice against actresses who marry and have children. Part of the public begins to see them as less available for on-screen romances, less marketable, and less interesting for the collective imagination. In Park Shin-hye's case, this was even heavier because she already carried years of accumulated criticism. The marriage wasn't the start of the problem. It was just the final push. After this period, her presence in the media decreased. Fewer headlines, fewer consecutive projects, less exposure, and as always happens, the public confused silence with irrelevance. The narrative emerged that Park Shin-hye disappeared, lost her space, or was forgotten. Few wondered if she simply chose a different pace, or if the industry stopped offering the same opportunities. The cruelest part is that this distancing rarely turns into an explicit cancellation. There is no scandal, no concrete controversy. It is a slow, silent, and socially accepted erasure. For male actors, marriage and fatherhood usually reinforce an image of maturity. For women, especially actresses, it often signifies the beginning of the end for the era of romantic leads. Even so, Park Shin-hye continued working, choosing projects more cautiously, and trying to reposition herself in an industry that rarely forgives women as they age. But the public no longer watched with the same interest. The criticism no longer came with the same force. It came with indifference. And often that is even worse. Park Shin-hye is not a perfect actress. She has made mistakes, made questionable choices, and taken on repetitive roles. But none of these flaws explain the level of criticism, rejection, and wear and tear she has faced over the years. Perhaps the real problem was never the acting. Perhaps it was the success that came too early, the massive popularity, and the fact that she is a woman in an industry that loves to create stars, but doesn't know what to do when they decide to live as real people. In the end, the question isn't whether Park Shin-hye is the most criticized actress in Korea. The question is, how many of those criticisms did she actually deserve?